The notification lit up Keira Morrison's phone at 7:43 on a Tuesday evening, and she stared at it with the confused expression of someone who had just discovered a second sun in the sky. "You have 23 new matches!" She had not opened a dating app in 2 years. She had not created a profile in longer than that. Yet there it was, glowing insistently, a message from an app called Eternal Companions that she was fairly certain she had never even heard of before this exact moment. Keira set down her mug of chamomile tea, the steam curling upward in lazy spirals, and unlocked her phone with mounting dread. The app opened to a profile that was unmistakably hers and yet utterly foreign. Her photograph smiled back at her, the one from last Christmas when her hair had been longer and she had been wearing that green sweater her mother said brought out her eyes. Beneath it, a biography written in a voice that sounded like her grandmother after 3 glasses of wine. Keira, 26, loves long walks, old books, and believes in true love. Looking for someone who will cherish her forever. Literally forever. Open-minded about unconventional relationships. Blood type O positive. Blood type O positive. Keira closed her eyes and took a long, steadying breath. Then she picked up her phone again and dialed. "Grandma Betty, what did you do?" The voice on the other end was bright, entirely unrepentant, and crackling with mischief. "Oh, sweetheart, did you get matches already? I only posted it this morning." "You made me a dating profile." "Well, you weren't going to do it yourself, were you? You've been alone ever since that awful Timothy. And darling, you're wasting your youth." "I read an article about how modern dating works now, and apparently you have to put yourself out there. So I put you out there. You listed my blood type. The app asked for it. I thought it was for medical emergencies. You know, in case you meet someone and you go rock climbing and you fall and need a transfusion." Keira pressed her fingers to her temples. "Grandma, this app is called Eternal Companions. I thought that sounded romantic. And you listed me as open-minded about unconventional relationships. Well, you are, aren't you? You always said you didn't care about age or income or any of that superficial nonsense. I'm just being accurate." Keira opened her mouth to explain all the ways this was a disaster, all the reasons her grandmother should not have access to her photographs or her personal information or apparently any technology more complex than a landline telephone. But before she could speak, another notification chimed. "Bathory Bloodraven has sent you a message. Grandma, I have to go." "Is it a match? Is he handsome? Send me a picture." Keira hung up and stared at the name on her screen. Bathory Bloodraven. It sounded like something from a gothic novel, the sort of thing you would name a villain in a story about cursed castles and forbidden love. She tapped the message. "Your profile intrigues me. I will visit you tonight to discuss terms. Expect me at 9 o'clock. No greeting, no question about whether 9 o'clock suited her schedule. Just a flat statement of intent, as though her consent was assumed or irrelevant or perhaps simply expected. Keira felt a spike of indignation rise in her chest, hot and immediate. She typed back quickly. "I don't meet strangers from the internet at my home. If you'd like to get coffee sometime next week, we can discuss that." The reply came within seconds. "I do not drink coffee. I will be there at 9. Ensure you are alone." Keira's indignation crystallized into something sharper, something closer to alarm. She screenshotted the conversation and sent it to her best friend Rachel with a string of exclamation points and the words, "Is this normal?" Rachel's response was immediate. "Absolutely not. Block him, or call the police, or both." That would have been the sensible thing to do. Keira knew that. She had taken self-defense classes. She had read all the articles about staying safe in the modern dating landscape. She was a grown woman with a master's degree in library science and a healthy sense of self-preservation. But something in those messages stopped her from blocking him immediately. It was not the rudeness or the presumption. It was the strange formality of the phrasing. "Discuss terms. Ensure you are alone." Who spoke like that? It was archaic, oddly precise, as though English was a language he had learned from old books rather than conversation. She clicked on his profile. The photograph took her breath away. He was beautiful in a way that did not seem quite human. pale skin, smooth as marble and just as white, stretched over high cheekbones, and a jaw that could have been carved by a sculptor with the obsession with perfection. His hair fell to his shoulders in a cascade of pure white, not the white of age, but something more ethereal, like moonlight made solid. His eyes were dark, so dark they appeared black in the photograph, and they stared out from the screen with an intensity that made Keira feel as though he could see her even through the pixels and glass. He wore something that looked like a high-collared coat from another century, black and severe, and in the background she could make out stone walls and what might have been a tapestry. His biography was brief. Bathory, age undisclosed, seeking a companion who understands the weight of eternity. I do not offer comfort or ease. I offer truth, protection, and a bond that will not break. If you are fragile, do not respond. Keira read it 3 times. Then she looked at the time, 8:15. If he truly meant to arrive at 9, she had 45 minutes to decide whether she was about to make the worst decision of her life or the strangest. She called her grandmother back. "Grandma, what app did you use?" "Exactly?" "Oh, let me check. I wrote it down. Eternal Companions. There was a whole article about it in that alternative newsletter I subscribe to. Apparently it's very exclusive. You have to be referred by someone already in the community." "What community?" It didn't say exactly. I assumed it was for people who take relationships seriously. You know, not just hookups. Real commitment. Keira felt a cold thread of understanding begin to weave itself through her confusion. "Grandma, did this article mention anything about vampires?" There was a pause. Then, in a tone of absolute delight, "Oh, is that what it is? That makes so much sense now. I thought the blood type question was oddly specific. You signed me up for a vampire dating app." "Well, sweetheart, you did always love those books. Anne Rice and Charlaine Harris and all those HBO shows. I thought you'd be thrilled." Keira sat down on her couch, her legs suddenly unsteady. "Grandma, vampires aren't real." "How do you know? You're always telling me to keep an open mind about things. Remember when I said I didn't believe in Zoom and you made me try it? That's not the same thing. Isn't it? Both involve technology I don't understand and people appearing where they shouldn't be able to." Keira laughed despite herself, a slightly hysterical sound that echoed in her small apartment. "This is insane." "Maybe," her grandmother said, and her voice softened. "But maybe it's also an adventure. And darling, you've been so careful for so long. Ever since Timothy broke your heart, you've been locked up tight. Maybe it's time to open the door and see what happens, even if it's just a strange man with an unusual hobby. What's the worst that could happen?" Death, Keira thought. Actual literal death. But she did not say it aloud because her grandmother was 83 and had buried a husband and 2 sisters and had earned the right to be a little bit reckless with other people's safety. Instead, she said, "If I'm murdered, I'm haunting you first. Deal. Now go put on something nice. First impressions matter." Keira hung up and looked down at her yoga pants and oversized sweater. Then she looked at the time. 8:30. She had 30 minutes. She did not believe in vampires. She believed in scam artists and con men and people who preyed on the lonely and the curious. She believed in danger that wore a charming face and made promises it never intended to keep. But she also believed in trusting her instincts, and her instincts were telling her something very strange. They were telling her to stay, not because she was foolish or naive, but because something in that photograph, in those formal, archaic messages, in the sheer audacity of someone announcing they would appear at her door in an hour, felt real in a way that frightened her and fascinated her in equal measure. She changed into jeans and a simple black sweater. She texted Rachel her address and told her to call the police if she did not check in by 10. She moved the baseball bat from her closet to behind the front door. Then she sat on her couch and waited. At exactly 9 o'clock, there was a knock. Not a doorbell, a knock. 3 measured raps against wood, firm and steady and somehow final. Keira stood. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a wild trapped thing trying to escape. She walked to the door and looked through the peephole. The man from the photograph stood in the hallway. He looked exactly as he had in the picture, and yet completely different, because no image could have captured the way he held himself. He stood as though he had never slouched a day in his life, as though the concept of uncertain posture was foreign to him. His white hair caught the fluorescent hallway light and seemed to drink it in, glowing faintly. His face was turned toward her door with absolute focus, and even through the distortion of the peephole, she could see those dark, dark eyes. He wore the same dark coat, and beneath it she could see a shirt that might have been silk and boots that looked like they had been made by hand sometime before the Industrial Revolution. He knocked again, the same 3 measured raps. Keira's hand moved to the deadbolt before her brain could catch up with the action. She opened the door 6 inches, the chain still engaged, and looked at him through the gap. Up close, he was even more impossible. No one was that pale. No one's skin looked like that, smooth and perfect and utterly bloodless. No one had eyes that black, that fathomless, that ancient. "You came," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I said I would." His voice was low, accented in a way she could not place. Not British, not European exactly. Something older, something that had watched languages evolve and kept pieces of all of them. "May I enter?" The question was pointed, formal. Keira thought of every vampire story she had ever read, every myth about thresholds and invitations. "Why do you need permission?" "Because I am not a barbarian." He said it with such profound dignity that Keira felt almost ashamed for suspecting otherwise. "And because the old laws still bind those of us who respect them. I cannot cross your threshold uninvited, nor would I wish to. You told me you were coming. You didn't ask. I told you I would visit. I am asking now if I may enter. The distinction matters." Keira studied him through the gap. Every rational part of her brain was screaming at her to close the door, lock it, and call someone with weapons or authority or both. But the irrational parts, the parts that had devoured fantasy novels as a teenager and still watched the stars on clear nights and wondered what else might be out there, those parts were whispering something different. They were whispering that this was real. "If I let you in, you won't hurt me?" "I will not." He said it simply, without embellishment or charm. A statement of fact. "And you'll leave when I ask you to?" "Immediately. And you're actually a vampire." For the first time, something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "Yes." "Prove it." He tilted his head slightly, considering. Then he opened his mouth. His canines lengthened slowly, extending into fangs that gleamed white in the hallway light. They were not the ridiculous Hollywood prosthetics Keira had seen in movies. They were real, sharp, designed by evolution or magic or something beyond her understanding to puncture flesh and draw blood. Then they retracted, sliding back into his gums as though they had never been there at all. Keira took a shaking breath. "Okay. Okay. You can come in." She closed the door, unhooked the chain, and opened it fully. Bathory stepped across the threshold with the same measured grace he did everything else, and suddenly her small apartment felt even smaller, crowded by his presence. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, and he carried himself with a kind of coiled readiness that reminded her of a predator at rest. He looked around her space with evident curiosity, taking in the overstuffed bookshelves, the plants on the windowsill, the framed prints of famous libraries on the walls. His gaze lingered on a photograph of her and her grandmother at last year's Thanksgiving. "You live alone," he said. "Yes." "Good. Why is that good?" He turned to face her fully, and the weight of his attention was like standing in a spotlight. "Because what I am about to tell you is not for others to hear. Not yet." Keira gestured to the couch, and after a moment's hesitation, Bathory sat. He looked deeply uncomfortable with the casual furniture, as though he was more accustomed to thrones or high-backed chairs that required perfect posture. She sat across from him in the armchair and waited. "You are aware that your profile was listed on Eternal Companions," he began. "I'm aware my grandmother listed my profile on Eternal Companions, without my knowledge or permission." Another flicker of amusement. "Grandmothers are formidable creatures. I have known many across the centuries, and they remain one of the few forces I respect without reservation." "How many centuries?" 6. Keira blinked. "You're 600 years old." "Approximately. I stopped counting the exact years sometime after the 3rd century. The decades begin to blur together. She tried to wrap her mind around that and failed. 600 years. He had been alive when printing presses were new technology, when continents were still being discovered, when her entire country had not yet existed. Why are you on a dating app? He leaned back slightly, and for the first time she saw something in his expression that might have been weariness. Because the world has changed, and we must change with it or perish. For centuries, my kind took what we needed without asking. We hunted, we claimed, we ruled through fear and power. It was simple. It was also unsustainable. What changed? Cameras, the internet, forensic science, databases that track blood supplies and missing persons. The modern world makes it nearly impossible to exist as we once did without discovery. And discovery would mean war, true war, between your kind and mine. We would lose. Your species has nuclear weapons and drones and a tendency toward genocide when frightened. We are powerful, but we are few. Keira found herself leaning forward despite her apprehension. So you're trying to adapt? Some of us are. 3 years ago, the Vampire Council convened for the first time in a century. We were facing extinction within 2 generations. Birth rates among vampires are abysmal. We are mostly made, not born, and making new vampires has become too dangerous. We needed a solution that did not involve conquest or hiding forever. The consent accord, Keira said, the pieces clicking together. Bathory's dark eyes sharpened with approval. You are quick. Yes, the consent accord, a framework for voluntary relationships between humans and vampires. Humans who understand what we are and choose to be companions, donors, partners. The app is part of that initiative. Humans who list themselves there know what they are agreeing to. Or they should. I didn't know what I was agreeing to. My grandmother did this without asking me. I am aware. He said it gently, and for the first time she heard something other than formality in his voice. Your profile was flagged almost immediately. The biographical details did not match the usual pattern. You listed yourself as open-minded about unconventional relationships, but your photograph showed someone who looked surprised by the camera, caught in a candid moment rather than posing. Your interests were books and walks. Nothing that suggested you understood the reality of what you were entering. I suspected interference. But you came anyway. I came because despite all of that, something in your profile called to me. He said it with the same directness he said everything else, as though admitting to being drawn to her was simply another fact to be stated. I have reviewed thousands of profiles over the past year. Most are curiosity seekers, or people with fantasies they mistake for understanding, but your photograph showed kindness, intelligence, a softness that has not been hardened by cynicism. I wanted to meet the woman behind it, even if she had been catalogued by a meddling grandmother. Keira felt heat rise in her cheeks. You said you wanted to discuss terms. I do. Bathory leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and the casual gesture made him seem suddenly more human. The accord is controversial, even among my kind. There are traditionalists who believe we should return to the old ways, who see voluntary partnerships as weakness. They are actively working to undermine the system, to prove that it cannot work, that humans will always betray us or fail to understand us. Every relationship formed through the accord is scrutinized, judged. If it fails, it becomes ammunition for those who wish to dismantle what we have built. And you want me to be part of this? To help prove it works? No. He shook his head slowly. I want to know if you would be willing to spend time with me, to let me court you in the old-fashioned sense, not as a political statement or a proof of concept, but because I am 600 years old, and I have been alone for most of them, and I saw your smile in that photograph and thought perhaps I would like to see it again. The honesty of it struck her like a physical blow. There was no manipulation in his voice, no attempt at seduction or charm, just a kind of raw vulnerability that she had not expected from someone who called himself a king. You're a king, she said. I am the king of the North American Vampire Court. It is a title that means I mediate disputes and maintain order and sit through interminable meetings about blood supply chains and political alliances. It does not mean I am happy. Keira thought about her own life, her quiet existence among library stacks and teacups and evenings spent alone. She thought about Timothy, who had seemed so perfect until he decided she was too boring, too content with small pleasures, not ambitious enough for his trajectory. She thought about her grandmother's voice on the phone, telling her it was time to open the door. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "what happens?" "I would visit you. We would talk. I would take you places, show you parts of my world that humans rarely see. I would court you as you deserve to be courted, with patience and respect. And if at any point you wish me to leave and never return, I will do so without question or complaint. And the blood? I will never take from you without your explicit permission, and even then, not until you trust me completely. I can feed elsewhere. There are willing donors, medical supplies, ways to survive that do not require putting you at risk. But you would want to, eventually." He met her eyes. "Yes, sharing blood is intimate for my kind. It is trust and connection and something deeper than your language has words for. But I have waited 600 years. I can wait as long as you need." Keira stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights spread below her third-floor apartment. Behind her, she could hear Bathory breathing, a soft, steady sound that proved he was not a corpse or a ghost, just something other than human. Something impossible. "Why me?" she asked the glass. "I do not know." His voice came from directly behind her, and she had not heard him move. "Perhaps because you did not choose this. You were thrown into it by accident, and yet you opened the door anyway. That takes a kind of courage that impresses me. Or perhaps because you have kind eyes, and I have looked into cruel ones for too many centuries. Or perhaps because fate has a sense of humor and arranged for your grandmother to stumble into vampire politics without realizing it. I do not know. I only know that I want the chance to find out." Keira turned to face him. He was closer than she expected, close enough that she could see the inhuman stillness in him, the way he did not shift his weight or fidget or do any of the small, unconscious movements that living people made. But his eyes were not cruel. They were lonely. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Court me. Take me places. Show me your world. But I'm keeping the baseball bat by the door, and my best friend has your photograph and instructions to call the police if anything happens to me." For the first time since he had arrived, Bathory smiled. It transformed his face, warming the marble coldness of his features into something almost human. "That is wise. I would expect nothing less." He reached into his coat and withdrew a card, thick cream paper with an embossed address. "My home. If you need me for any reason, come there or call. The gates will recognize you now." "Recognize me how?" "I will ensure they do. The details are tedious." He moved toward the door with that same liquid grace, then paused. "May I see you tomorrow evening? I work until 6. Then I will collect you at 7. Wear something comfortable. We will be walking." "Where?" "Somewhere beautiful. Trust me." And then he was gone, slipping through the door and down the hallway before she could formulate a response. Keira stood in her suddenly empty apartment and wondered if she had just made a deal with the devil or simply agreed to the strangest first date in human history. Her phone buzzed. "Rachel, are you alive?" "Yes." "Did he show up?" "Yes." "And?" Keira looked at the card in her hand, at the elegant script of the address. "I think I'm going out with him tomorrow. I'm coming over, right now, with wine. You're not making decisions like this without supervision." Rachel arrived 20 minutes later with 2 bottles of red wine and a laptop already open to a Google search for Vampire King North America. Keira let her in and endured the interrogation that followed, answering questions about what he looked like, what he said, whether she had checked him for a reflection or a pulse or any of the traditional markers of undead status. "He breathes," Keira said. "I heard him. And he casts a shadow. I saw it in the hallway light. So either he's actually a vampire and all the myths are wrong, or he's something else entirely. Or he's a very dedicated LARPer with contacts and dental prosthetics." He made his fangs extend and retract, right in front of me. "Rachel, it was real. They came out of his gums." Rachel poured them both very full glasses of wine. Okay. Let's say vampires are real. Let's say the extremely hot, well-dressed man who showed up at your apartment is actually an immortal king of the undead. What are you doing? I don't know. Keira took a long drink. Going on a date? With a vampire. With a vampire. Who found you because your grandmother accidentally signed you up for a supernatural dating app? Yes. Rachel started laughing, a helpless giggling that turned into full body shaking. This is insane. This is absolutely insane. Your life is a paranormal romance novel. I know. But are you actually going? Tomorrow at 7? Keira thought about Bathory's eyes, about the loneliness in them, about the way he had asked permission for everything and offered her escape routes at every turn. She thought about his smile, rare and genuine and worth waiting for. She thought about 600 years of existence and how exhausting that must be, how every day must blur into the next until nothing felt new or surprising or worth the effort of engagement. Yes, she said, I'm going. Rachel clinked her glass against Keira's. Then I'm tracking your phone and checking in every hour. And if he turns out to be a serial killer, I'm writing a very angry Yelp review of Eternal Companions. They drank to that, and Rachel stayed until midnight, until the wine was gone and Keira's anxiety had settled into something closer to anticipation. After Rachel left, Keira lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and wondered what tomorrow would bring. She fell asleep with the business card on her nightstand and dreamed of white hair and dark eyes and a voice that spoke in centuries. The next day crawled past with agonizing slowness. Keira worked her shift at the library, scanning books and helping patrons and reshelving returns, and her mind was somewhere else entirely. She kept checking her phone, half expecting a message saying he had reconsidered or it had all been an elaborate prank. But there was nothing except a text from her grandmother asking for updates and one from Rachel demanding proof of life. At 6:30, she was home and changing clothes for the third time. Comfortable, he had said. She settled on dark jeans, boots, and a soft sweater in deep blue that her mother had given her last birthday. She left her hair down and applied minimal makeup, then stood in front of the mirror and wondered who she was trying to impress. A vampire king, apparently. The knock came at exactly 7 o'clock. Keira grabbed her coat and opened the door before she could lose her nerve. Bathory stood in the hallway wearing different clothes but the same timeless elegance. Tonight it was dark pants and a sweater that looked like cashmere, covered by a long coat that might have been from this century or the last one. His white hair was pulled back at his neck, and the severe style emphasized the sharp beauty of his features. You look lovely, he said. Thank you. So do you. He offered her his arm, a gesture so old-fashioned that Keira almost laughed, but she took it, and the muscle beneath her hand was solid and cool even through the fabric. They walked to the elevator in silence, rode down to the ground floor, and emerged into the autumn evening. There was a car waiting at the curb. Not a limousine or anything ostentatious, but a sleek black sedan that purred with the kind of engine that cost more than Keira made in a year. Bathory opened the passenger door for her, waited until she was settled, then moved around to the driver's side. I thought you'd have a chauffeur, Keira said as he pulled into traffic. I prefer to drive myself when possible. I spent too many centuries on horseback or in carriages at the mercy of others' skill. Controlling my own movement is a freedom I do not take for granted. They drove through the city as dusk thickened into night, and Keira watched the streets pass outside her window. She had lived here for 4 years and thought she knew it well, but Bathory navigated with the ease of someone who had watched the city grow up around him, who remembered when these streets were dirt paths or perhaps forest. How long have you been here? She asked. In this city? 50 years. In this continent? Since the 1600s? I was in Europe before that, and before that the Middle East. I was born in what you would now call Romania, though it had a different name then and belonged to a different empire. Do you miss it? Your birthplace? I remember it poorly. I was human there for only 18 years, and I've been vampire for 600. The memories fade like old parchment, brittle and incomplete. Sometimes I can recall the smell of my mother's bread baking or the sound of church bells on Sunday mornings. but I cannot recall her face with certainty anymore. That is what time does. It blurs everything until only impressions remain. There was grief in his voice, old and deep and carried so long it had become part of him. Keira reached across the center console and touched his hand where it rested on the gear shift. He startled slightly at the contact, then turned his palm up and laced his fingers through hers. They drove like that for another 10 minutes, in silence, connected by that simple touch. Then Bathory pulled off the main road and onto a smaller one that wound up into the hills outside the city. The houses grew sparser, the trees thicker, until they were driving through what felt like wilderness, despite being only miles from the urban center. He parked in a small lot near a trailhead and came around to open her door. The air was cool and sharp with the scent of pine and earth. Above them, stars were beginning to emerge from the darkening sky, unbothered by the light pollution that drowned them out in the city. "Where are we?" Keira asked. "Somewhere I come when I need to remember what the world was like before concrete and electricity. Walk with me." He offered his hand again, and she took it. They followed a trail that wound upward through the trees, narrow and clearly not meant for casual tourists. Bathory moved with perfect confidence in the darkness, and after a moment Keira realized he was guiding her around roots and rocks she could barely see. "You can see in the dark," she said. "Yes, one of the few advantages of the condition. I will not let you fall." They climbed for perhaps 20 minutes until Kira's legs were burning and her breath was coming in clouds. Then the trees opened up, and they emerged onto an outcropping of stone that looked out over the valley below. The city spread before them like a carpet of lights, glittering and alive, beautiful in the way that human creation could be beautiful. "Oh," Keira breathed. Bathory released her hand and moved to the edge of the outcropping, looking out over the view. "I found this place 30 years ago. I come here when the weight of the court becomes too much, when I need to see that there is still beauty in the world my kind did not create or control. We are parasites technically. We create nothing. We only consume what humans have made. Sometimes I forget that there is nobility in that, in your species' endless drive to build and dream and reach for more. This helps me remember." Keira moved to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "You speak about humans like you're not one of us anymore. I am not. I have not been for a very long time. But you were. That has to count for something." He turned to look at her, and in the starlight his pale skin seemed to glow faintly. "You are kind to think so. Most of my kind have forgotten their humanity entirely. They see it as weakness, something to be shed and left behind. I have tried to hold on to it, but it slips away despite my efforts. Every year I understand my human life less. Every decade I feel the gap widen between what I was and what I am. Sometimes I wonder if there will come a night when I wake up and realize I have lost it entirely, that I have become something else, something cold and cruel and no longer recognizable." "I don't think that will happen," Keira said softly. "Why not?" "Because you're here. Because you brought me to this beautiful place instead of somewhere designed to impress me. Because you talk about loneliness and beauty and remembering your mother's bread. Something cold and cruel wouldn't do those things." Bathory was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough. "You are a dangerous woman, Keira Morrison." "Dangerous how?" "Dangerous because you make me hope. And hope is a treacherous thing for someone who has lived as long as I have." He moved suddenly, turning to face her fully, and reached up to cup her face with one cool hand. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, a touch so gentle it made her shiver. "I should not have brought you here. I should have taken you somewhere public and well-lit and safe. But I wanted you to see this. I wanted to share something that matters to me. That was selfish." "I'm glad you did," Keira said. "I wanted to see it. I wanted to know what matters to you. You barely know me. Then tell me. Help me know you." And there, on that outcropping of stone beneath the emerging stars, he did. Bathory told her about his human life, the pieces he could still recall, about being the youngest son of a minor nobleman, expendable and unimportant, about the night a vampire attacked their household and gave him a choice: die, or become what she was. about choosing immortality because he was 18 and terrified of death and could not imagine what 600 years would actually mean. He told her about the early years, the bloodlust and confusion, the way he had been a monster because he did not know how to be anything else. About the decade he spent in a church crypt trying to pray away what he had become. About the night he emerged and decided that if he was damned, he might as well be damned with purpose. He told her about building the North American court from nothing, about gathering the scattered vampires who had fled Europe and creating a structure that gave them stability and law. About the political games, the rivalries, the constant threat of exposure. About watching human history unfold decade by decade, war by war, revolution by revolution, and feeling increasingly disconnected from the species he had once belonged to. And he told her about the loneliness, the bone-deep isolation of being functionally immortal in a world where everything and everyone you cared about eventually turned to dust. Keira listened to all of it, and when he finally fell silent, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Bathory went rigid with surprise, then slowly, carefully, returned the embrace. He was cool against her, but not cold, and she could feel the faint, steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "Thank you for telling me," she said into his chest. "Thank you for listening." His voice rumbled above her head. "It has been a very long time since anyone asked." They stood like that for minutes or hours. Keira could not be sure. Time felt strange up here, stretched thin and irrelevant. Finally, Bathory stepped back, though he kept one hand on her shoulder as though reluctant to break contact entirely. "I should take you home. It is late, and you have work tomorrow." "I don't want to go yet." "Keira, just a little longer, please." He studied her face in the starlight, and whatever he saw there made him nod. "A little longer." They sat on the stone, close together, and Keira asked questions about his long life while he answered with the careful precision of someone who was used to guarding his words. She learned that he spoke 14 languages, that he had met several historical figures she had only read about, that he was an excellent pianist, but had not played in decades because the music of his youth sounded strange to modern ears. She told him about her own life in return, about growing up in a small town and dreaming of cities, about her love of books and quiet spaces, about her grandmother's wild spirit and her parents' steady practical love, about Timothy and the way that relationship had collapsed under the weight of his ambition and her contentment, about feeling like she was waiting for something without knowing what. "Perhaps you were waiting for a 600-year-old vampire to appear in your hallway," Bathory said, and there was humor in his voice, dry and unexpected. "Perhaps I was." When he finally took her home, it was after midnight. He walked her to her apartment door and waited while she unlocked it. "May I see you again?" he asked. "Yes." "Tomorrow?" "I work late tomorrow. Friday?" "Friday." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so courtly and old-fashioned that it should have been ridiculous. But it was not. It was lovely. "Sleep well, Keira Morrison." "Sleep well, Bathory Bloodraven." She closed the door and leaned against it, her heart racing, her mind spinning. Through the wood she heard him walk away, his footsteps fading into silence. Then she pushed off the door and grabbed her phone to call Rachel, because this was not something she could process alone. "Tell me everything," Rachel demanded the moment she answered. So Keira did. The next 3 weeks passed in a strange, dreamlike rhythm. Bathory visited her every few days, always at night, always with some new place to show her or story to tell. He took her to an underground club where vampires gathered, and she watched from the safety of his presence as they moved through the crowd with predatory grace. He brought her to his home, a sprawling mansion built into the hillside that looked like it had been transplanted from Gothic Europe, all stone and dark wood and rooms full of furniture from a dozen different centuries. He introduced her to other vampires, cautiously, always staying close enough to intervene if they showed aggression. Most were curious about her, about the human who had captured their king's attention. A few were hostile, watching her with eyes that promised violence if she proved unworthy. But none challenged Bathory directly, and Keira began to understand the weight of power he carried, the respect or fear his position commanded. He did not try to kiss her. He did not push for intimacy beyond holding her hand or putting his arm around her shoulders when the nights grew cold, and he never, not once, mentioned blood. Keira found herself thinking about him constantly. At work, she would look up from her desk and remember something he had said, some observation about human nature or history that reframed everything she thought she knew. At night, she would lie in bed and replay conversations, analyzing his words and expressions, trying to understand the complicated creature he was. She was falling for him. Slowly, carefully, but falling nonetheless. Rachel was equal parts concerned and delighted, demanding updates after every date and insisting on meeting him herself to make sure he's not a creep, immortal or otherwise. Keira's grandmother called weekly to ask if there had been a proposal yet, convinced that her matchmaking had resulted in true love and entirely unrepentant about the chaos she had caused. And then, 3 weeks after that first knock on her door, everything shifted. Bathory arrived at her apartment on a Friday evening, and Keira knew immediately that something was wrong. His usual composure was fractured, tension visible in the line of his shoulders and the tightness around his eyes. "What happened?" she asked, pulling him inside. "The traditionalists are making their move. There was a challenge filed with the council this afternoon. They are demanding a formal review of the consent accord, with the intention of dismantling it." Keira felt ice settle in her stomach. Can they do that? They can try. The council is divided. Half support the accord, seeing it as necessary for our survival. The other half view it as capitulation, a surrender of our superiority and strength. If the traditionalists can prove that the accord is being abused, that humans are being manipulated, or that the relationships are false, they will have grounds to end it. And us? Our relationship? Bathory met her eyes, and the anguish in his expression was stark. We have been noticed. The fact that your profile was placed without your knowledge has been brought up as evidence that the system is flawed, that humans are being entered into agreements they do not understand. And the fact that you are with me, with the king, makes it political. They are suggesting that I am using my position to coerce you, that this is not genuine but a manipulation designed to promote the accord. That's not true. None of that is true. I know, but perception matters in politics. If they can make it appear true, if they can undermine what we have, they will use it to dismantle everything. Keira paced across her living room, her mind racing. So what do we do? How do we prove them wrong? I do not know. Bathory sank onto her couch, and for the first time he looked every one of his 600 years. I am many things, Keira, but I am not skilled at defending genuine emotion. I do not know how to prove that what I feel for you is real when I barely understand it myself. She stopped pacing and looked at him, at this ancient, powerful being who had faced down centuries of conflict and danger, but was lost when it came to matters of the heart. And something in her settled, a decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. Then we show them, she said. Show them what? That this is real. That we're real. Not with arguments or speeches, but by being together, by living it truthfully, like you said. If they want to scrutinize us, let them. We have nothing to hide. Bathory stood slowly. You understand what you are suggesting? You would be inviting the council into our relationship, allowing them to observe and judge everything we do. Your privacy would be gone. Your safety could be compromised. I understand. And she did. She understood that this was bigger than them, that what they had stumbled into was a battle for the future of vampire-human relations, that her grandmother's accidental matchmaking had placed her at the center of something that mattered. But I also understand that if we back down, if we hide or give up, then they win. The accord fails, and people on both sides suffer. I don't want that. You are remarkable, Bathory said softly. And you are sure? I'm sure. But Bathory? Yes? If we're going to do this, if we're going to be proof that the accord can work, then we have to really do it. No holding back. No protecting me from the truth of what you are. His eyes darkened. Keira. I know you've been careful. I know you haven't fed from me, haven't even talked about it. But that's part of what they'll say. isn't it? That this isn't a real vampire-human relationship because you're treating me like I'm fragile, like I can't handle the reality of what you need. I do not want to put you at risk. I know, but I trust you. And if we're going to prove that this can work, that vampires and humans can exist together honestly, then you have to trust me too. You have to believe that I can make this choice with full knowledge and consent. Bathory crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. You terrify me. Do you know that? You make me feel things I have not felt in centuries, and it terrifies me because I could not bear to lose you. Keira wrapped her arms around him and held on just as tightly. Then don't lose me. Fight for this. For us. Show them that you can be who you are and I can be who I am, and we can choose each other anyway. He pulled back just enough to look down at her, and his expression was fierce. If we do this, there is no going back. The council will watch us. The traditionalists will look for any weakness, any sign that this is false or coercive. Our every interaction will be dissected. Let them watch. Let them see that this is real. And if they demand proof, if they insist on witnessing the blood bond? Keira's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. Then we show them. Bathory kissed her then, finally, desperately. It was nothing like the courtly restraint he had shown for weeks. It was hunger and need and 600 years of loneliness crashing against the hope of connection. His lips were cool against hers, his hands tangling in her hair. And Keira kissed him back with everything she had, pouring into it all the feeling that had been building since he first appeared in her hallway. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. I am in love with you, Bathory said, his forehead resting against hers. I did not intend to be. I thought I would court you politely, see if we were compatible, proceed with caution and logic. But you have undone me completely. I am in love with you, Keira Morrison, and I will fight heaven and hell and the entire vampire council to keep you safe. Tears pricked at Keira's eyes. I love you too, even though you're bossy and old-fashioned and you brood like it's an Olympic sport. I love you. He laughed, a sound of pure joy, and kissed her again. This time it was gentler, sweeter, a promise rather than a claim. Then we do this together, he said. We face the council together. We prove them wrong together. Together, Keira agreed. The formal council review was scheduled for 2 weeks later, held in the Vampire Court's main chamber deep beneath the city. Bathory explained the setup to Keira over several evenings, preparing her for what she would face. The council consisted of 7 elders, vampires who had lived for at least 3 centuries and held authority over different regions of North America. They were powerful, proud, and deeply divided on the question of the accord. The most dangerous is Cassius Valen, Bathory told her. He is 900 years old and leads the traditionalist faction. He believes vampires should rule humans, not court them. He will do everything in his power to make you seem weak or manipulated. And the others? 3 support the accord: Alara Nightshade, Marcus Ravencrest, and Thorn Ashwood. 2 are undecided: Vivian Shadowborn and Nikolai Bloodmoon. Cassius is the 7th. We need at least 4 votes to maintain the accord's legitimacy. If we lose the undecided ones, everything collapses. Keira absorbed this information and tried not to think too hard about the fact that she was about to be interrogated by 900-year-old vampires who could kill her with a thought. Instead, she focused on practical matters, like what to wear to a vampire court session and whether it was appropriate to bring notes. Wear what makes you feel confident, Bathory advised, and speak from the heart. Do not try to match their formality or their rhetoric. Your humanity is your strength here. Let them see it. The night of the review, Bathory collected her in the same sedan, but this time his tension was palpable. He drove in silence, his hands tight on the steering wheel, his jaw set. Keira reached over and touched his arm. It will be okay, she said with more confidence than she felt. I hope you are right. They descended into the court through an entrance hidden in what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse. The tunnel beyond was old stone, worn smooth by centuries of use, lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Keira could hear voices ahead, low and echoing, speaking in languages she did not recognize. The chamber itself was vast, a cathedral-like space carved from living rock. The ceiling arched high above them, lost in shadows. 7 thrones sat in a semicircle at the far end, each occupied by a figure of impossible beauty and terrible presence. Vampires filled the rest of the space, standing in loose clusters, their pale faces turned toward the center where a single chair had been placed. For her. Bathory's hand tightened on hers as they walked forward. Every eye in the room tracked their movement, and Keira felt the weight of that collective attention like a physical pressure, but she kept her head up and her steps steady, refusing to show fear. They stopped before the council, and Bathory bowed, a formal gesture that somehow managed to convey respect without submission. Keira followed his lead, inclining her head. "Bathory Bloodraven," said the vampire in the central throne. He was ancient, with white hair that fell past his shoulders and eyes like chips of ice. Cassius Valen. "You stand before this council to answer questions regarding your relationship with the human Keira Morrison and the legitimacy of the consent accord." "I do," Bathory said. "And you, human, consent to be questioned?" Keira found her voice. "I do." "Then let us begin. Bathory, you may stand with your court. The human will sit." It was a power play, separating them, forcing Keira to face the council alone. She saw Bathory's jaw tighten, saw him about to protest, and she squeezed his hand once before releasing it. "It's okay," she murmured. She walked to the chair and sat, folding her hands in her lap to hide their shaking. Bathory moved to stand with a group of vampires off to the side, all watching intently. Cassius leaned forward. "Tell us, Keira Morrison, how you came to be listed on Eternal Companions." "My grandmother created the profile without my knowledge. I didn't know the app existed until I received notifications about matches." "And yet you did not immediately remove yourself from the system." "I was curious, and when Bathory contacted me, I agreed to meet him." "Why?" Keira met the elder's cold gaze. "Because something in his message felt genuine. Because I was tired of being careful and alone. Because I wanted to see what would happen." "You were not afraid?" "I was terrified. I took precautions. I told my best friend where I was and gave her instructions to call the police if anything happened to me. I kept a baseball bat by the door. But I also listened to my instincts, and my instincts said to give him a chance." A female vampire spoke up, her voice melodious. "Alara Nightshade, and Bathory informed you of what he was? Of the risks involved?" "Yes. He told me he was a vampire. He showed me his fangs. He explained the consent accord and the political situation around it. He was completely honest." "And you believed him? Just like that?" "Not just like that. I researched vampires, or at least the legends. I watched how he moved, how he breathed, the way he spoke. I tested him in small ways, and yes, eventually, I believed him." Cassius's expression was contemptuous. "You expect us to accept that a human librarian with no knowledge of our world simply believed in vampires because a man with contact lenses and dental prosthetics told her to?" "I didn't say it was easy. I said I believed him." Keira kept her voice steady. "And I'm not stupid. I know how insane it sounds. But I also know what I've seen and experienced over the past month. I've been to the Vampire Club. I've met dozens of your kind. I've learned about your history and your laws. I've seen things that can't be explained away by special effects or human trickery. So yes, I believe. Whether you respect that belief is your problem, not mine." A ripple of reaction moved through the room. Several vampires were nodding. Others looked scandalized that she had spoken to an elder with such directness. Cassius's eyes narrowed. "Tell me about your relationship with Bathory Bloodraven." So she did. Keira described their first meeting, the way he had asked permission to enter, the conversations on the hillside and in his home. She talked about the courtship, slow and careful and full of moments that mattered. She spoke about learning who he was beneath the titles and power, about the lonely ancient man who remembered his mother's bread and played piano when no one was listening. And she spoke about falling in love, about the choice she had made, not because she was manipulated or coerced, but because she wanted to. Because he was worth loving. "He has not fed from you," Cassius observed. It was not a question. Not yet. "Why not?" "Because we were taking our time. because he wanted me to be sure, because he was protecting me. Or because this relationship is a performance, carefully staged to promote the accord, but lacking true substance. Keira felt anger flare hot in her chest. It's not a performance, and if you need proof, I'm prepared to offer it. Cassius tilted his head. Explain. The blood bond. Bathory told me that sharing blood is intimate for vampires, that it represents trust and connection. If you need evidence that this relationship is real, that I'm making an informed choice, then witness it. Now. The chamber erupted in noise, vampires speaking over each other in a dozen languages. Cassius raised his hand for silence. You would offer your blood freely before this council to prove your commitment? Yes. Do you understand what you are suggesting? The bond formed through voluntary blood sharing is not easily broken. It ties you to him in ways that transcend human understanding. You would be giving him access to your life, your emotions, your very self. I know. I'm doing it anyway. Cassius looked past her to where Bathory stood. And you, King? Do you consent to this display? Bathory's voice rang out strong and clear. Only if Keira truly wants it. I will not perform intimacy for political purposes. Keira turned in her chair to look at him. I want it, not for them, for us. But if it helps prove the accord works, then that's a bonus. He crossed the chamber in several long strides and knelt beside her chair so they were at eye level. You are certain. Once done, it cannot be undone. I'm certain. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheek exactly as it had that first night on the hillside. Then I will treasure this gift for the rest of my existence. He stood and turned to face the council. If we do this, it will be done properly, with respect and ritual. Not a spectacle, but a sacred act. I request privacy, or at least discretion. Cassius waved a hand dismissively. You may use the alcove. We will observe from here. A section of the wall opened to reveal a smaller chamber, dimly lit and furnished with a single low couch. Bathory took Keira's hand and led her inside. The moment they crossed the threshold, the quality of sound changed, becoming muted and distant. Some kind of magic, Keira assumed, designed to give the illusion of privacy while still allowing observation. You do not have to do this, Bathory said quietly. We can find another way. I want to. I meant what I said. Keira sat on the couch and looked up at him. Show me what this means to you, to your kind. He sat beside her and took both her hands in his. The blood bond is not merely feeding. When done with consent and intention, it creates a connection between vampire and human. I will taste not just your blood but your emotions, your essence, and you will feel what I feel, experience an echo of my existence. It is overwhelming for humans sometimes, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. I trust you. Bathory lifted her wrist to his lips and kissed the pulse point there, gentle and reverent. This will hurt for a moment. Then the venom will take effect, and it will become pleasant. If you need me to stop at any point, tell me. I will stop immediately. Keira nodded, her heart racing. She watched as his fangs extended, those wickedly sharp canines emerging from his gums. He held her gaze as he pressed them to her wrist, and then there was a sharp, bright pain as they punctured her skin. She gasped, and Bathory's free hand came up to steady her. Then the pain faded, replaced by a spreading warmth that radiated up her arm and through her entire body. It was pleasant, intoxicating, better than any wine or drug. Her head spun with it, and she felt herself leaning into him. And then the connection opened. It was like being struck by lightning, a sudden, overwhelming rush of sensation and emotion that was not her own. She felt Bathory's mind touch hers, felt 600 years of memory and experience pressing against her consciousness. She felt his loneliness, vast and aching, an ocean of solitude that had nearly drowned him. She felt his wonder when he first saw her photograph, the unexpected spike of hope that maybe, impossibly, he had found something worth caring about again. She felt his love for her, fierce and absolute and slightly terrified, because he had not loved anyone in so long he had forgotten how vulnerable it made him. And beneath it all, she felt his hunger, the deep primal need for blood that was intrinsic to what he was. But it was not violent or cruel. It was simply necessary, like breathing, like the beat of a heart. The world tilted and righted itself. Bathory withdrew his fangs carefully and licked the wounds closed, sealing them with whatever strange alchemy lived in vampire saliva. Then he pulled her against his chest and held her while the connection slowly faded to a manageable level. "Breathe," he murmured. "Just breathe. It will settle." Keira breathed. Gradually, the spinning slowed and the overwhelming rush of emotion became bearable. She could still feel him there, a presence at the back of her mind, warm and steady. The bond. That was... She could not find words. "I know." He stroked her hair, his touch gentle. "You did beautifully. I am so proud of you." They sat like that for several minutes, tangled together, adjusting to the new reality of being connected. Finally, Bathory stood and helped her to her feet. "Ready to face them?" "Ready." They emerged from the alcove hand in hand. The council chamber was silent, every vampire watching them with expressions ranging from awe to anger. Cassius looked like he had bitten into something sour. "It is done," Bathory announced. "The bond is formed. Keira Morrison is my companion by choice, by consent, and by blood. Anyone who questions the legitimacy of our relationship can feel the truth of the bond themselves if they have the skill." Ilara Nightshade rose from her throne. "I can feel it from here. It resonates with honesty. This is no performance or political manipulation. This is a genuine bond, freely given and gratefully accepted." She looked at Cassius. "The accord works. They are proof." "One example proves nothing," Cassius snapped. "Then find another example that proves otherwise," a new voice said. "Vivian Shadowborn, one of the undecided elders. You have been claiming the accord is being abused, that humans are being coerced or deceived. But where is your evidence? All I see is a young woman who made a choice with full knowledge and a king who respects that choice. If this is failure, I would hate to see what you consider success." "I agree," said Nikolai Bloodmoon, the other undecided elder. "The accord stands. We vote to maintain it." Cassius looked around at the other council members, and Keira could see the calculation in his eyes, the recognition that he had lost this battle. "Very well. The accord stands, for now. But I will be watching, Bathory Bloodraven. If this bond shows even the slightest sign of corruption or coercion, I will bring it before this council again." "Watch all you like," Bathory said coolly. "You will see nothing but what we have shown you tonight, truth and choice and love." The council session ended shortly after, vampires dispersing into the tunnels and back to their territories. Bathory led Keira out through the same path they had entered, and by the time they reached his car, she was shaking with exhaustion and relief. "You were magnificent," Bathory said as he drove her home. "Brave and strong and perfect. I have never been more honored to be connected to someone." "I can still feel you," Keira said wonderingly. "Right there, like a warm spot in my mind. And I can feel you. Your curiosity, your kindness, your slightly manic amusement at the absurdity of the entire situation. It is lovely. You are lovely." He walked her to her apartment door, and this time when he kissed her goodnight it was different, deeper, because they were bound now, and neither of them was alone anymore. "Sleep well," he said against her lips. "You too." Vampires do not sleep, not the way humans do. "Then rest well. Think of me. Always." Keira floated through the next few days in a haze of contentment. The bond hummed between her and Bathory constantly, a background awareness of his presence that was comforting rather than intrusive. She could feel when he was working, focused and intense, and when he was thinking of her, warm and affectionate. At night, they were together, and during the day she went about her normal life with the secret knowledge that she was connected to a vampire king and everything had changed. Rachel noticed immediately. "You look different, glowy. Did you sleep with him?" "Better," Keira said. "I blood bonded with him in front of the Vampire Council to prove our relationship is real." Rachel stared at her for a full 10 seconds. Then she pulled out her phone. I'm calling your mother. This has officially escalated beyond my ability to provide appropriate best friend support. But she was smiling as she said it, and when she hugged Keira goodbye, there was genuine happiness in it. I'm glad you found him, even if he is an ancient undead monarch. You deserve someone who looks at you the way he does. Kira's grandmother, predictably, was over the moon. She called the moment she heard about the council session, having somehow gotten the details from a source she refused to name. I knew it, she crowed. I knew the moment I saw that app that it was meant for you. This is destiny, Keira. Destiny arranged by your very clever grandmother. You had no idea it was a vampire dating app. Doesn't matter. I still made it happen. When's the wedding? Grandma, we've been together for a month. And he's 600 years old. He doesn't have time to waste on long engagements. Ask him what his intentions are. Keira laughed despite herself. I'll take that under advisement. But her grandmother's question lingered. What were his intentions? What was the future of a relationship between a human woman with a normal lifespan and a vampire king who would outlive her by centuries? They had not discussed it, both caught up in the present moment, in the relief of having survived the council review. She brought it up one evening when they were at his mansion, curled together on a sofa in his private library. What happens when I get old? Bathory set down the book he had been reading and looked at her. What do you mean? I mean I'm human. I age. In 10 years I'll have wrinkles. In 30 I'll be elderly. In 60, if I'm lucky, I'll be dead. What happens to us then? He was quiet for a long moment, his hand stroking her hair with absent tenderness. I do not know. I have been trying not to think about it because the thought of losing you is unbearable. Could you turn me, make me like you? It is possible, but it is dangerous, and the outcome is never certain. Some humans survive the turning and adapt well. Others go mad from the bloodlust. Still others simply die, their bodies unable to withstand the transformation. I would not risk you that way unless you were dying anyway, and it was our only option. So, we have a finite amount of time together, decades if we're lucky. Yes. His voice was rough with grief. I am sorry. I should have thought of that before allowing myself to fall in love with you. But I am selfish, and I wanted you too much to be wise. Keira turned to face him fully. Don't apologize. I went into this with my eyes open. I knew what you were. And if we only get decades, then we make them count. We make every moment matter. You are too good for me. Probably. But you're stuck with me now, blood bond and all. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and the bond flared between them bright and warm. When they finally broke apart, Bathory's expression was determined. Then we will make them count. Every moment, every day. I will court you properly, the way you deserve. And when you are ready, if you want it, I will marry you by human law and vampire custom. I will give you everything I can for as long as I can. Is that a proposal? It is a promise. The proposal will come later, with better planning and a ring. Keira smiled. I'll hold you to that. True to his word, Bathory courted her with the thoroughness of someone who had 600 years of romantic tradition to draw from. He brought her flowers from his private gardens, night-blooming varieties that flourished in darkness. He wrote her letters in flowing script on parchment paper, declarations of affection that were both elegant and heartfelt. He took her to the opera, the symphony, art galleries after hours when the vampires who funded such places could enjoy them without human crowds. He introduced her to his inner circle, the vampires who served as his advisors and friends. They were wary at first, protective of their king, and suspicious of the human who had captured his attention. But Keira won them over slowly, asking questions about their histories and listening to their stories with genuine interest. And at night, when they were alone, they explored the bond between them, learning to communicate through it, to share emotions and sensations that words could not capture. It was intimate in a way that transcended physical touch, a merging of selves that left Keira breathless with wonder. 3 months after the council session, Bathory proposed. He took her back to the hillside overlook where they had shared their first real conversation, and there, beneath the stars, he knelt and offered her a ring that had belonged to his human mother, saved across 6 centuries in countless moves. It was a simple gold band set with a small ruby, old-fashioned and precious. "Keira Morrison, will you marry me? Will you be my wife by human law and my bonded companion by vampire custom? Will you let me love you for as long as we are both blessed enough to exist in this world together?" Keira was crying by the time he finished, tears streaming down her face. Yes, yes, absolutely yes. He slid the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, and the bond blazed between them like a star going nova, bright with joy and love and the promise of a future together. They planned the wedding for 3 months later, long enough to organize but not so long that they were wasting precious time. It would be a hybrid affair, honoring both human and vampire traditions. The ceremony would take place at sunset, that liminal moment between day and night when both species could be present. Keira's family was less shocked by the vampire revelation than she expected. Her mother pursed her lips and said, "Well, he has excellent manners and clearly adores you. I suppose his dietary restrictions are his business." Her father asked a lot of questions about vampire physiology and history, fascinated by the anthropological implications, and her grandmother looked unbearably smug, taking credit for the entire relationship at every opportunity. "I'm a matchmaking genius," she declared to anyone who would listen. "Found my granddaughter a king. A king! What's your grandmother done for you lately?" Rachel agreed to be maid of honor, though she insisted on meeting every vampire who would be attending to ensure Keira's safety. Bathory's second-in-command, a vampire named Lucian Darkmoor, served as best man and promised Rachel that anyone who threatened Keira would answer to the entire court. The wedding itself was beautiful and strange and perfect. They married in the gardens of Bathory's estate, surrounded by night-blooming flowers and lit by thousands of candles. Vampires and humans mingled in careful harmony, both sides on their best behavior. The ceremony was officiated by a human priest and a vampire elder, blending traditions that spanned centuries and cultures. Keira wore a simple white dress that made her feel like she had stepped out of a fairy tale. Bathory wore formal black that emphasized his pale beauty and regal bearing. When they exchanged vows, his voice was steady and sure, promising to love and protect her for all the days of her life. When she promised the same, the bond between them pulsed with shared emotion, broadcasting their commitment to everyone present who could sense such things. They sealed the vows with a kiss and a ritual sharing of blood. A single drop from each of them mingled in a ceremonial cup and consumed together, renewing and deepening the bond they already shared. The reception lasted until dawn, humans and vampires celebrating together in a way that would have been impossible before the consent accord. There was dancing and music and speeches that ranged from heartfelt to hilariously inappropriate. Keira's grandmother gave a toast that took full credit for the entire relationship and suggested that she should be consulted on all vampire-human matching going forward. Cassius Vallon attended, though he looked sour throughout, and left early with a curt nod that might have been acknowledgement or might have been dismissal. As the sun began to rise, the vampires retreated to the mansion's underground levels, and the human guests began to disperse. Bathory took Keira's hand and led her to their private chambers, a suite of rooms that had been prepared for them deep in the earth where sunlight could not reach. "Tired?" he asked, exhausted and deliriously happy. He kissed her forehead. "Then sleep, my wife. I will watch over you." Keira fell asleep in her vampire husband's arms, the bond humming between them, and dreamed of the future they would build together. The months and years that followed were not without challenges. The traditionalist faction continued to oppose the accord, though their support dwindled as more successful vampire-human relationships formed. There were moments of danger, times when Keira's connection to Bathory made her a target for those who opposed his policies. But he protected her with fierce devotion, and she learned to defend herself with training from the vampire court's best fighters. She also became an advocate for the accord, speaking to humans who were curious about relationships with vampires and helping to establish protocols that protected both species. Her background in library science proved unexpectedly useful as she helped document vampire history and create educational resources for humans entering the community. Bathory ruled his court with Keira at his side, and together they proved that vampires and humans could be partners in every sense of the word. The bond between them deepened with time, becoming as natural as breathing, a constant presence that enriched both their lives. 5 years after their wedding, Keira's grandmother announced that she wanted to be turned. "I'm 88, she said matter-of-factly over Sunday dinner. "I've lived a good long human life, but I'll be damned if I miss out on seeing what happens next with you two. Plus, I've always wanted to travel, and I understand vampires are excellent at that sort of thing. So find me someone who can turn me without killing me, and let's get this done." Bathory, to his credit, took the request seriously. "It is dangerous at your age. The older the human, the harder the transformation. I'm aware. Do it anyway. I'm not asking for forever, but I'd like a few more decades to meddle in people's lives and take credit for things. You owe me that much. I found you your wife." Keira laughed until she cried, because her grandmother was indomitable and impossible and absolutely serious. "If this is what you really want, Grandma, then we'll make it happen. But you have to be sure." "I'm sure. I've been reading up on it, talked to some of Bathory's people. I know what I'm getting into. Now stop fussing and start making arrangements." The turning was done carefully, with healers standing by and Bathory himself overseeing the process. It was performed by Ilara Nightshade, who had centuries of experience and a reputation for successful transformations. Keira held her grandmother's hand through the entire agonizing process, feeling the old woman's pain and fear and determination through the physical contact. For 3 days, her grandmother lay in a death-like sleep while the vampire venom worked through her system, killing her human self and remaking her into something new. Keira barely left her side, and Bathory brought her food and comfort and assurance that this was normal, that the transformation was proceeding as it should. On the 4th day, her grandmother opened her eyes. They were no longer the faded blue of age, but a brilliant crimson, the mark of a newly made vampire. Her hair, which had been thin and gray, was now fuller and white as snow. The wrinkles had smoothed from her face, not making her young but making her ageless, frozen at a point somewhere between elderly and eternal. "Well," her grandmother said, her voice stronger than it had been in years, "that was unpleasant. But I think it worked. Someone get me a mirror." She adapted to vampire life with the same cheerful determination she had brought to every other challenge in her long life. She learned to feed without killing, to manage the bloodlust, to navigate vampire society with the same nosiness she had applied to human social circles. And she took enormous satisfaction in attending celebrations and family gatherings that she would have missed had she remained human. "Best decision I ever made," she declared. Well, second best. First best was signing Keira up for that app. The years continued to pass. Keira aged gracefully, laugh lines forming around her eyes and silver threading through her hair. Bathory remained unchanged, frozen in his eternal youth, and sometimes she saw grief in his eyes when he looked at her, awareness of the time they were losing. But they did not waste a moment of it. They traveled the world together, Bathory showing her places he had lived and loved across his long existence. They built a library together, a massive collection that combined his ancient texts with her modern expertise. They hosted gatherings that brought vampires and humans together, continuing to prove that the two species could coexist peacefully. And they loved each other deeply, thoroughly, with the intensity of people who knew that their time was finite and precious. When Keira turned 60, Bathory took her back to the hillside overlook on the anniversary of their first visit there. The city had grown larger in the decades since, but the view was still beautiful, still capable of taking her breath away. "I have been thinking," he said as they stood side by side looking out over the lights, "about your mortality, about the fact that I will lose you eventually. Bathory, let me finish. I have been thinking that perhaps that is not a tragedy, perhaps it is a gift. You have taught me to value time again, to see each moment as precious because there will not be infinite moments. You have taught me to be present, to love deeply, to feel fully. I had forgotten those things across 6 centuries of existence. You reminded me, and that is worth everything, even knowing that I will grieve when you are gone. Keira took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. You'll be okay. You're stronger than you think. I will be devastated, but I will survive, and I will remember. Every moment we shared, every laugh and conversation and quiet evening together. I will carry it with me for the rest of my existence. You will live forever in my memory. Keira Morrison Bloodraven. That is my promise to you. She kissed him there beneath the stars, and the bond flared between them one more time, bright and warm and unshakable. They had 23 more years together. 23 years of mornings and evenings, of small domestic routines and grand adventures, of love that deepened rather than faded with time. Keira's hair went fully silver, and her movements slowed, and eventually she needed a cane to walk the gardens she had always loved. But her mind stayed sharp, and her spirit stayed bright, and Bathory loved her more with each passing day. When she finally became ill, a cancer that modern medicine could slow but not stop, Bathory offered one last time to turn her, to save her with the vampire transformation. She refused gently. I've lived a human life, she said from her bed in their chambers. A full one, a happy one. I'm ready for it to end naturally, but I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll stay open, that you won't close yourself off after I'm gone, that you'll let yourself love again someday, even if it takes another 600 years. You deserve that. You deserve to be happy. I do not want anyone else. I know, but someday you might, and I'm giving you permission. I want you to live, Bathory, really live, the way we live together. Promise me. He promised through tears, the first time she had ever seen him cry. Keira passed peacefully 3 weeks later, surrounded by the people she loved. Bathory held her hand as her breathing slowed and then stopped, as the bond between them stretched thin and finally, gently, released. She died with a smile on her face, content with the life she had lived and the love she had known. Her funeral was attended by hundreds, both human and vampire, all whose lives she had touched. Bathory spoke at the service, his voice steady despite the grief that radiated from him. He talked about her courage, her kindness, her ability to see the best in everyone, including 600-year-old vampires who thought they were past redemption. He talked about the way she had changed the world, not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent choices to be brave and open and loving. And he talked about gratitude, about how lucky he had been to love her and be loved by her, even for such a brief time in his long existence. Keira's grandmother, still spry and meddlesome at Vampire 110, took over planning the wake. She held it at Bathory's estate, the same gardens where the wedding had been held 38 years earlier. Humans and vampires mingled again, sharing stories and memories, celebrating a life well lived. At the end of the night, as the last guests were departing, Keira's grandmother found Bathory standing alone in the garden, staring at the night-blooming flowers his wife had loved. She was happy, the old vampire said. Every single day with you, she was happy. That's all anyone can ask for. I miss her. His voice was raw. I have lost many people across the centuries, but this is different, worse, because I knew it was coming and could not stop it. Of course it's worse. You loved her properly, with your whole heart. That means the grief is worse too. But you'll carry it. You're strong enough. Am I? You're still here, aren't you? Still breathing, still standing. That's enough for now. The rest will come with time. She patted his arm and shuffled off into the darkness, leaving Bathory alone with his grief and his memories and the ghost of a bond that had defined the best decades of his long life. Years passed. Bathory continued to rule his court and advocate for the consent accord, which had become firmly established as vampire law across North America and was spreading to other continents. He thought of Keira every day, remembered her voice and her laugh and the way her mind had felt against his through the bond. The grief faded to a manageable ache, ever present but no longer overwhelming. He kept his promise to her. He stayed open. He continued to engage with the world, to value each moment, to look for beauty and connection in a life that stretched endlessly ahead of him. And sometimes, when he stood on that hillside overlook and looked down at the city lights, he could feel her with him still, a presence in memory, if not in reality. And in the end, that was enough. Because she had been right. The time they had shared, finite and precious and full of love, was worth the grief that followed. She had taught him to be human again, to feel deeply and love completely, and accept the beautiful tragedy of temporary things. Keira Morrison Bloodraven had lived for 83 years, loved a vampire king, and changed the world in small, significant ways. And when the vampire historians wrote about the consent accord decades later, they always mentioned her name, the human woman whose accidental profile listing had sparked a revolution and proved that love could bridge even the gap between mortal and immortal, human and vampire, temporary and eternal. Somewhere in her old apartment, long since passed to new tenants, a baseball bat still stood behind the door. And somewhere in a mansion built into the hillside, a vampire king kept a photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a surprised smile, taken by her meddling grandmother on a Christmas morning years ago. He would keep it for the rest of his very long existence, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life were the ones you never expected, the ones that knocked on your door at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday evening and changed everything. And in a care facility downtown, an elderly vampire with white hair and mischievous eyes told anyone who would listen about the time she signed her granddaughter up for a dating app and accidentally arranged a marriage that saved vampire-human relations and proved that even immortal beings needed love and family and someone brave enough to open the door when fate came knocking. "Best decision I ever made," she said, grinning with fangs that still surprised her sometimes. "And I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Well, if I still had a heartbeat. You know what I mean?" The nurses humored her, and the other residents rolled their eyes, but every word was true. And somewhere, in whatever came after, Keira Morrison was laughing at her grandmother's shameless pride and eternal matchmaking victory, grateful to the end for the meddling that had given her a love story worth telling and a life worth living, one night at a time.